Picture this: a cramped kitchen in the 1940s South, sunlight crawling through a single dusty window, and a black mother quietly stacking plates only her family is allowed to use. She doesn't announce a rule, she doesn't explain a lesson. She just lifts the chipped ceramic dishes from a high shelf and says the one sentence black children never questioned: "Don't eat off everybody's plates." To outsiders, it sounded like superstition, maybe even snobbery. But to black families, it was survival. A rule carved out of centuries of humiliation, contaminated kitchens, Jim Crow danger, and a terror so normalized that it became culture. This wasn't about being picky. This wasn't about being dramatic. This was about staying alive in a country that treated black bodies as disposable and black sanitation as optional. Because the truth is simple: black people didn't avoid eating off everybody's plates out of fear of germs. They avoided them out of fear of history. That history started in slavery-era kitchens. Enslaved people prepared meals but could never use the same plates, cups, or utensils as the white families whose food they cooked. Their touch was considered contamination. One set of dishes represented humanity, the other represented degradation. And when you grew up during an era where even a fork carried the weight of racial hierarchy, you learned to protect yourself from anyone's carelessness but your own. Generations later, those habits didn't fade, they hardened. Jim Crow didn't just segregate water fountains, it segregated dishes, silverware, and entire dining rooms. Black travelers during the 1920s and 1930s wrote about restaurants who served them on cracked plates, visibly dirty cups, or utensils pulled from a bucket of cloudy water. Newspapers documented cases where black patrons were deliberately given plates that white customers wouldn't touch. One incident in North Carolina detailed a black man being served food on chipped enamelware kept separate from white dishes, not for hygiene purposes, but to mark who was allowed dignity and who wasn't. And then came the hidden reason, the one that passed directly into black kitchens. The knowledge that some white-owned establishments purposely reused unwashed dishes for black customers because they believed black bodies didn't warrant sanitation. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't exaggeration. It was documented. Black journalists from the 1930s to the 1950s exposed restaurants reusing plates pulled straight from someone else's scraps or wiping them with an apron before serving them to black diners. That wasn't an accident. That was a message. Black families never forgot. The records prove the memory was justified. In 1957, the Carolina Times exposed a restaurant in Kinston, North Carolina, where chipped plates were kept exclusively for black customers. Staff admitted the plates were not washed, just wiped down with a dirty cloth. In 1932, the Jackson Advocate uncovered a Mississippi cafe serving spoiled pork to black diners while white patrons received fresh cuts. Health inspectors confirmed that the tainted meat was stored in a separate bin, reserved for Negro service. And during the 1930s, 1950s, multiple black newspapers exposed Woolworth's and S.H. Kress lunch counters for handing black customers greasy plates, cracked dishes, used utensils, and cups pulled from dirty water. Families described vomiting and stomach pain afterward. By 1944, Richmond health inspectors found a cafe serving black diners with plates washed. In stagnant dishwater, utensils soaking in murky tubs, and dishes greasy to the touch. Black customers reported nausea. No one was punished. So inside the black home, the rule became protection. Elders didn't explain the horrors behind it because there was no need. A simple sentence carried the weight of centuries. Eat off clean plates and don't eat off everybody's. Because what looked like ordinary distrust actually came from extraordinary trauma. Black women scrubbed their dishes with boiling water and bleach because they remembered the days when sanitation was denied to them. Black families refused to borrow other people's plates because they remembered restaurants that handed them used ones. And black people brought their own dishes to church picnics, community gatherings, and potlucks. Not because they didn't trust the people hosting, but because they didn't trust a system that had trained certain people to treat black lives like an afterthought. The unwritten rule traveled across states, across generations, across migrations, from the Deep South to Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, Newark, and Philadelphia. Black grandmothers everywhere had the same voice, the same tone, the same warning. They didn't say sanitation. They didn't say health code violation. They said, "Baby, keep your plate clean." And beneath that simple instruction lived the memory of segregated diners, back alley lunch counters, and waitresses who tossed black dishes into a separate sink. These weren't old wives' tales, these were survival codes. Even the federal government documented it. During the 1959 to 1962 Civil Rights Commission hearings, black witnesses testified under oath that restaurants used separate, filthy dishes for black patrons, cracked, dirty, and sometimes still carrying food from the previous customer. It wasn't rumor, it was federal record. And oral history holds the rest. Maybe that's why even today, you'll see a black person rinse a dish off before using it, even if it came straight out of the cabinet. Not because they mistrust the people they're with, but because their culture remembers a time when survival depended on inspecting every plate. And it's why your grandmother might sit down at a restaurant, scan the table, and calmly ask for plastic utensils. She wasn't being dramatic. She was remembering a time when a fork could betray you, when a plate could carry danger, when cleanliness wasn't something black people could count on from the outside world. Even now, some black folks will avoid eating off dishes in unfamiliar homes. A child visiting a friend may hesitate before picking up a cup, not because the household is unclean, but because black culture has a long memory. Because even in modern times, stories still circulate about how everyone else gets real plates while the black guest gets the paper one. Because the remnants of Jim Crow don't need laws to survive. They survive through the quiet habits passed down from the people who lived it. Every rule black people inherited had a reason. Every "don't do that" came from a wound someone survived. And every cultural habit that outsiders misunderstand traces back to something real, something painful, something buried, but never forgotten. This isn't superstition, this is memory, and memory never dies. Scope News tells the truth. Here are the facts. The 1932 Jackson Advocate documented spoiled meat served to black patrons. The 1957 Carolina Times exposed segregated, unwashed plates in North Carolina. Woolworth's and Crest lunch counters were reported by the Pittsburgh Courier and Chicago Defender for serving black customers with dirty or reused dishware from the 1930s, 1950s. In 1944, Richmond health inspectors confirmed unsanitary dishwashing methods used exclusively for black diners. The 1959-1962 Civil Rights Commission recorded testimony about restaurants using separate, inferior dishes for black patrons. These patterns shaped the cultural memory and food safety habits passed down through generations. Legal disclaimer. This content is for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes. It reflects documented history, oral traditions, and cultural memory surrounding race, segregation, and discriminatory sanitation practices. Viewer discretion is advised, as some material involves accounts of racism and trauma. Scope News aims to portray historical events accurately within the limitations of archival records and image licensing.